Can you explain now? We mentioned it a little bit in the first part. Metabolic syndrome. What are the causes for that? And we already explained how intermittent fasting will help that. But what are the what are the main causes for that condition called the metabolic syndrome? And
Mm.
how common is it? I think it's a pretty common scenario, but a lot of people might not know that they're actually going through that.
Yeah, true. That's very true. And a lot of people are walking around and they don't actually know that's the thing. With metabolic syndrome, I think there are many. We can say there are many causes, but to me, I think from my personal opinion, really, is that the single driving factor for everything is hyperinsulinemia. Is how I
Mm,
term it. Essentially, what that means is that your body is in a state where it has to keep producing high levels of insulin because there's just a lot of glucose that is being flooded in the body. If I always try and take it back to ancestral times. Now, the level of evolution, if we use evolution as a theme, that we have gone through from the last 2000, 3000 years has not been as fast as the level of social and technological evolution that we've gone through. So we've evolved technologically and socially at a very fast pace, essentially, developing things like cars, phones, microwaves, and fridges. But our body has not evolved to catch up with that.
yes.
We are still in an evolutionary state where the body knows that over a period of time, you are subconsciously going to need to seek energy or seek food. So it's primed to wait for that. But all of a sudden, it's finding out that it's constantly getting food. You are snacking at 10 o'clock, you're giving it sugar, you're giving it Milo, you're putting in bread. Everything is just coming and it's just a constant hit of sugar. So the
Yes.
body now asks itself, okay, gosh, there's so much sugar coming in, we're breaking this glucose. What do we need to do? So one of the theories that I like that one of the people I follow gave was that think about it as like a neighborhood. Neighborhood needs energy to function. So let's say they don't have constant light or energy. So every day,
Yes.
insulin is the guy that comes around with barrels or cups. Comes around with a cup of what's in the cup is the glucose. Gives it to each house.
Yes.
The house, the cell
Yes.
says, "See, you take this, you take it and say thank you very much. You put it, you start your energy, it burns. So every day has to bring that amount of energy constantly. So you're already waiting for it. All of a sudden, it turns up with a barrel of the energy
Instead
of
of
the
a
glucose
cup.
instead of the cup. I'm like, oh, okay. All right, fine, thank you. You take it, but you only need a cup. So what do you do with the rest? You keep it there. The next day it comes with a barrel again. And it comes, just keeps coming. What will happen to your house? You get filled up with the barrels. So that is what happens to the cells and the liver. So the way metabolic syndrome starts is there's a lot of glucose coming into the body. The body has to find a way to start converting it into places to store. The liver can't store too much glycogen. It gives it to the muscle to store. The muscle has stored what it can store. They can't store more. They start converting it into fat cells. You convert it into fat cells, and body now starts thinking, what do we need to do? Start sending fat cells all around the body. We have natural adipose tissue that is everywhere in the body. Now, interestingly, you do not build new fat cells. The same fat cell absorbs and stretches out. It's that same cell that keeps stretching and keeps storing the things. So you start building fat. You build fat, it develops obesity. Now, because there's an obesity in the body runs through a basic level of inflammation. Because there's inflammation there, what happens to your blood vessels? Now, the blood vessels the lining starts getting damaged because everything is moving up and down. Lots of fat cells are being transported up and down. Now, when they get damaged, the natural thing for it is that anywhere there's damage, it has to start healing. In that process of healing, the body finds a way, and some fat cells get trapped in that place. So that's where what we
Wow.
call the atherogenic process starts with each cell. That process starts forms things like atherosclerosis. I mean, there's a more in-depth explanation, but this is one of the
Yes.
simplest ways to explain it to people.
Yes.
The, some people are purporting the theory that it's the oil you drink or you eat that gets congealed in the blood vessel. That's complete BS. all fat cells are broken down in body, and fat cannot be, it
Yes.
has to be attached to something to transport. And because the
Yes.
walls are injured during the transportation, that's how the cells get stuck in there. And the process of healing forms the atherosclerotic plaque in each of the blood vessels. So that's one of the
Yes.
components. Well, we've got obesity, and the whole point of the fact is that after a while, your body is not able to stuff more glucose into the cells. So it just gets tired, and that's where insulin resistance comes in. Because the body is not able to push in more glucose into the cell, the glucose is left floating around to find a way to store it. So body now tries to store it more as fat as quickly as
Mm.
possible. That's when we now term things like, you do a blood test, the blood sugar is sky high, you say it's diabetes, and you term that one other. So we've already got the obesity that is already coming in place because you're converting a lot of it to fat. You're storing what we call the visceral fat. Now, apart from that, the liver now in haste to throw out a lot of the glucose to places to store, breaks down and forms quick fat molecules called triglycerides and fatty tissue,
Yes.
and them get stored in and around the liver. So one way to explain it is that sometimes when your house is full, you take stuff and you just package it and store it on top of one of your roof, inside your ceiling, because there's no space. You're storing things in different places. That's
Yes.
one of, obviously the science is a bit more nuanced than that, but for a layman
Yes.
explanation, I think it's one of the best things to.
Yes.
So that's how they now have fat deposited around the liver. So when we say metabolic syndrome, the three things that we bring out, one is high blood pressure, diabetes, and fatty liver disease. And fatty liver, these three things themselves can be classified, talked about as obviously different diseases, but we're finding out that people have these three things together. And one of the unifying factors for them is the fact that there is a hyperinsulinemia is driving everything. High levels of insulin, high levels of glucose in body is driving everything.
Wow. That was very, very interesting and insightful. So, like Dr. Tosin has said earlier, if you missed the first part, one of the ways to start the reversal of this process, if you are in this kind of a situation, is to start to apply intermittent fasting, right?
Mhm.
Intermittent fasting in stages and in phases will help you and reset your system.